The sky opened like an old wound above the prairie, rosy and raw, stitched with streaks of violet, where the sun began to rise slow and merciless over the bones of the west. Dew clung to every blade of wildgrass, trembling like it knew what the day would bring. And in the hush, before men stirred and horses kicked up dust, Clara Mayfield rode beside her father's wagon with her bonnet tied tight and her jaw tighter still. She was not what the townfolk called ladylike, though she wore the dress and said her pleases. Something in her carried silence like a second skin, not empty, not dull, but watching, like the owls did, like the wolves just outside the lantern's reach. Her father said she'd always been that way, born during a thunderstorm and never once afraid of it. Behind them, the wagons creaked like bones in a stiff wind. Women huddled over breakfast fires. Men checked rifles with hands calloused by trade and time. Miss Liddy, sharp as old vinegar, watched Clara with the same suspicion one might reserve for a stray dog that hadn't bitten yet. Clara ignored the eyes. She always had. She held the reins of her mare loosely, let the wind pull strands of hair from her braid. She looked out at the open land and did not dream, for dreams had little place in a girl raised with more dust than comfort. Her fingers were red from helping the Tanner child last night. He'd taken a fall from the wagon and split his cheek open. She'd stitched it clean, the boy barely whimpering under her steady hands. They made camp that evening in a narrow canyon where the rock rose up around them like old guardians. Her father thought it would shield them from wind. Clara thought it felt like a trap, but she said nothing. Jude Mayfield was a fair man, a hard man. But when he spoke, others followed, even when the land whispered otherwise. They ate beans in the firelight and shared jokes like brittle crusts of bread. Clara watched the canyon mouth, watched the way the shadows shifted too fast for evening. Her mare snorted once, twice. The hush came too early, and then hell broke. It did not start with war cries, but the scream of horses. A blur of motion, arrows hissing like angry insects through the night. Men scrambled, women wailed. Flames leapt from knocked lanterns, throwing the whole canyon into chaos. Clara ducked instinctively, rolled beneath the wagon, her hands bloody from the dirt. A boot landed near her head, not her father's. Painted skin, a sharp shout in a language she could not parse, only feel, like thunder without rain. She was yanked by the arm, dragged like canvas through firelight and dust. She kicked, screamed once. Not again. After that, there was only sky spinning and faces, painted, unfamiliar. Young, old, cold-eyed. A blow to the side of the head made the world tilt. When it righted again, Clara was tied to the back of a horse, her wrists numb and her mouth filled with the taste of iron. The canyon faded behind them. Fires burned low, some flickered out. She didn't know if her father still breathed, if Miss Liddy still prayed. She didn't know if she cared to know. She did not beg. Not once. She rode like a sack of grain for miles, slumped against the horse's hide. Around her, the Apache moved like ghosts, silent when they wanted, loud when they meant fear. Most didn't look at her. Some laughed. But one rode at the edge of the group, not laughing, not shouting. His eyes were the same color as the river mud after a rain, and they watched her not with triumph, but something else. Regret, maybe, or a warning. Night fell like a curtain. They stopped in a hollow framed by crooked trees. She was pushed to the ground. Food was thrown to her, unrecognizable, but hot. A skin of water dropped nearby. She didn't move. Only when they left her alone did she crawl toward the water and drink like a feral thing, slow and silent. She dared a glance around the camp. Most were already asleep, wrapped in pelts or blankets. The one with river mud eyes sat alone, sharpening a blade. He didn't look at her, not directly, but when her gaze lingered, he paused. Then, in a gesture so small she almost doubted it, he nodded once. Not in greeting, not in peace, in acknowledgement. The wind sighed through the trees, and Clara sat back, heart hammering a rhythm that had no name. Her wrists burned, her head throbbed. But beneath all that, somewhere deep and hidden, a spark held. She was still alive, and she knew, now, that there was no rescue coming. No cavalry, no father's arms, no God in the sky to pluck her from the grip of this wild land. If she was to make it through this, she would have to listen more than speak, learn faster than they expected, become smaller, quieter, until the moment arrived to become something else entirely. As the moon arched above and the earth gave off its heat like a long-held breath, Clara stared upward, the stars blurring as her vision swam. And still she would not cry, not because it made her weak, but because even her tears she would not give them, not yet. Far across the fire, the silent warrior still watched, not like a captor, not like a savior, but like someone who had once known what it meant to be stolen from your place and left to find your name again in the dark. By morning, she would walk a different path, and someone in that camp might choose to walk it with her. But not tonight. Tonight, the fire cracked, and the world kept its silence. And the girl who had been Clara Mayfield began, without knowing it, to become someone else. Someone the world would remember. Someone worth saving. Someone who would never again be underestimated. The mornings came slower in this place, cool, gray, hushed, under a high desert sky. Clara woke with the ache of stiff limbs and the heaviness of unfamiliar air pressing into her lungs. She'd slept on earth that did not want her, beneath a sky that watched but did not care. Her wrists bore the shadow of rope burn. Her dress, once soft and sky-colored, now hung in tatters, stained with dust and silence. No one spoke to her. No one needed to. She was the outsider, the pale-eyed stranger dropped like a stone into still water, and all around her the ripples had begun. The Apache moved with purpose but without hurry. They rose like the wind, one moment at rest, the next already vanishing into their chores. Children tended fires. Women braided hair, ground maize into soft yellow powder. Men sharpened arrows, mended leather. Clara watched all of it from a rock near the edge of the camp, her stomach aching, her spirit tethered tight behind her ribs. No chains held her now. That detail was new. She'd expected to be kept tied, watched, cursed, or struck. But instead, they had left her be. Her hands were free, though every movement still felt borrowed. She was being watched, of that she had no doubt, but not the way a guard watches a prisoner. More like the way a hunter watches a deer, deciding if it is worth the shot. She ate what they gave her. The food was strange, corn mixed with beans, a paste sweetened by wild berries, and served cold on a flat piece of bark. She forced herself to chew slowly. Hunger was louder than pride. A girl came near, younger than Clara, maybe 14. Black eyes, curious and sharp. She held a small basket full of dried leaves, stared at Clara too long, then spat in the dirt and walked away. Clara did not flinch. She understood this language. She had grown up beneath it. Midday came warm and dry. Somewhere in the rocks, a hawk cried out, lonely, insistent. Clara turned her face toward the sound and closed her eyes. It was then that he approached, not with noise or command. He came the way wind does, brushing past rather than breaking through. She opened her eyes to find him there, Naiche, the one from the night before, the one who had not cheered, not laughed. He was younger than she'd first thought, 19, perhaps 20. His face was marked not by paint, but by years too quiet to count, and a kind of grief that did not name itself. He held out a bowl. Warm steam curled from it, something freshly cooked, seasoned with herbs that smelled of smoke and sage. Clara did not reach for it. She looked at him, waiting. He set it down between them and backed away 2 paces, then sat on his heels. Silent. Still. She reached. Slowly. Took the bowl. Ate. He did not smile. Only watched, the way he always seemed to, as though looking was safer than speaking. A boy ran past them, chasing a chicken that had broken loose. Laughter followed. A dog barked. Life unfolded around her like petals, soft, unthinking, beautiful in its rhythm. But Clara sat still, Naiche stiller. Later, he rose and left without a word. She watched him go and realized she had not feared him. That night, they built a fire low and wide. Shadows danced across her skin as Clara sat nearby, pretending not to listen. The words spoken were not hers to understand. She caught pieces, names maybe, or warnings. The name Naiche was spoken more than once, followed by sharper tones. Glances were thrown. One man pointed at her, then at the horizon. She recognized threat in any tongue. Naiche said little. Only once did he speak sharply, cutting across the older men with something like defiance. The air stilled, but nothing more happened. The matter was dropped. For now. A few days passed. Or perhaps it was only 2. Time moved strangely, thick and heavy, like syrup in winter. Clara began to walk further from the fire, always under the watchful eyes of someone unseen. She learned to carry water, to grind corn with the stone bowl they lent her. The women watched her, some with wariness, others with bitter amusement. But when she knelt beside a boy who had scraped his leg chasing rabbits and cleaned the wound with hands made steady by need, one woman offered an odd, brief, not warm, but not cruel. She clung to it like a rope in a flood. Naiche returned to her days later with a blade and a branch, sat beside her, carved the stick until it curved, held it out, an offering, a bow small enough for practice. No arrows yet, just a shape. She touched it, ran her fingers over the smooth wood, then looked at him. Why? The question passed between them like smoke. He tilted his head, pointed to the horizon, then mimicked drawing a bow. So I can run, she thought, or fight. She took the bow and cradled it in her lap. He stood and walked away. The next morning, he brought her an arrow. They didn't speak, not truly, but slowly, across the days, words began to shape between them like stones placed carefully across a stream. He taught her names of things. Sky, fire, water, Nali, Ko, Tu. She repeated them softly, like prayers. He listened when she told him hers. Clara. His lips stumbled around it. Cloth Ra. She smiled for the first time. He said it again. Better. And so they built a bridge. Not made of language, but of noticing. He saw how she traced the fire's edge with her eyes, how she flinched at sudden movement. She saw how he knelt longer than needed after tending wounds, how he offered his portion to the old ones first. They shared silence like a cup, but around them the storm gathered. Mocha DeVito, the loud one, the cousin, watched her too, but not with kindness. His gaze lingered too long. His laughter, when it came, was sharp and hollow. She avoided him. Naiche noticed. At dusk, Clara sat on a rise near camp, watching the sun melt into blood across the hills. Naiche joined her, quiet as always. She pointed to a ridge where birds swirled. He gave her the word for them, Giage. They sat until stars cracked open the sky. Then she asked, softly, unsure of a word, but trying. Why? His brow furrowed. She placed her hand on her chest. Me. Why? He looked at her for a long moment, then bent, picked up a small stone, held it to the moonlight. Smooth, pale, but with a fracture running through it. He placed it in her palm, closed her fingers around it, then stood and walked away. Clara sat there, the wind tugging at her hair, the stone warm from his touch. She knew, then, that she was no longer a prisoner, but not yet free, and neither was he. The rains came sudden and soft, drizzles that stitched silver threads into the dust, coaxing the scent of sage and ash from the earth. Clara stood beneath a pine that leaned like an old man over the hillside, watching the way droplets gathered at the edges of her sleeves. They had given her a new dress. Not fine, not soft, but warmer. Stitched by Nita's mother, it bore the unmistakable mark of something meant for her. She wore it with care, like a borrowed name. The fire crackled behind her, and the camp moved as it always did, quiet, practiced, unhurried. Yet the days had changed. The looks were different now. Wariness had softened to regard, and in some faces, even something near to respect. She'd earned it not with speech, but with doing, by grinding maize without being told, by tending a baby when its mother fell ill, by enduring when others might have broken. And then there was Naiche. She had learned to read his silences like stories. In them were whole chapters, pages of grief and memory and a strange, wordless hope. He never reached for her, never stepped too close. But when she struggled to lift a bucket, he was there. When her hands blistered from work, he showed her the trick of folding cloth between skin and stone. When Mokotevito leered from across the fire, Naiche's presence grew still as a blade in the dark. One morning, Clara found him standing by the river, ankle-deep in cold water. His bow rested beside a fallen log. In his hands, a small bird, a finch, its wing crooked and trembling. He dipped it gently into the water, washing away a sheen of sap. Then, wordlessly, he set it free. It flapped crookedly, rising, falling, rising again. She stepped beside him, and for a long while, neither of them moved. He turned to her and placed his hand over his chest. Spoke a word. She didn't understand it, not fully. But the way he said it, soft, careful, like breath, made her believe it was something important. Something like belonging. Clara began to gather his language the way children gather pebbles, slowly, with joy and curiosity. She asked names for things. Sky, stone, sorrow. He answered with patience, with glances and gestures, with words spoken low beneath the canopy of stars. At night, she dreamed in half-languages. In her sleep, her lips shaped sounds once foreign, now familiar. One afternoon, a hunting party returned. Among them, Naiche limped, one leg soaked red with blood. An accident, they said, his horse spooked, and he'd been thrown. The wound ran deep along his calf, angry and jagged. They laid him by the fire. Others hovered, muttering. But Clara moved forward without being asked. Her hands did not shake. She gathered clean cloth, water, a poultice made from bark and smoke. She cleaned the wound with a tenderness born of necessity, wrapped it tight, and sat with him through the night while fever tried to take its toll. When he opened his eyes and saw her, he did not speak. He reached for her hand, just for a moment, and then let go. It changed something in her. Not suddenly, not wildly, but surely. She began to notice things more closely, how his voice grew softer around children, how he stood between her and the colder glances of others. He began to ask her questions, too. Awkward at first. What her name meant. If she had brothers. What snow felt like on the skin. She told him stories of the north, of horses in winter, of the way fire feels when you're certain it's the only warm thing left in the world. He listened like it mattered. One evening, they sat beside the river, their knees nearly touching, and Naiche handed her a stone smoothed by water, its shape resembling a heart worn thin by time. She traced it with her thumb and looked up to find him already watching. She didn't speak, just leaned her head against his shoulder. For a long while, they stayed that way. But not all eyes had softened. The tension in the camp thickened slowly, like smoke that refused to rise. Mokotevito's gaze sharpened. Whispers grew teeth. Some saw Clara's place among them as an insult, a softness that did not belong. Then came word of a parley, a chance to trade with white men along the river, weapons and goods in exchange for what had been taken, including her. The elders debated. Voices rose. Some said she was no longer a prisoner, that her hands bore the same calluses as theirs. Others argued law, honor, blood. Naiche stood and spoke with fire Clara had never seen in him. He did not shout. He burned. His voice rippled like heat over stone, steady and sure. But even fire has limits. The elders did not move. That night, Clara went to him. She found him near the edge of camp, kneeling beside a tree, his head bowed. She knelt too, touched his hand. He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw fear behind his eyes. Not of death, but of loss. She shook her head. No, she said. I won't let them take me if it costs you. He brushed a thumb across her cheek, then rose and walked into the dark. The next day, she awoke to shouting. Horses gone. Naiche missing. He'd taken her chance. He'd given her back to them. She stood at the edge of the clearing, wind biting her face, and watched the emptiness where he once stood. Her stomach twisted, not with betrayal, but with knowing. He had not abandoned her. He had protected her the only way he knew how. And now he would pay for it. Nita came to her later, pressed something into her hand. a flint arrowhead, carved smooth. Naiche's. He left this, she said. He said you would understand. Clara closed her fingers around it, the edges biting into her palm. She did. And she would not let it be the end. Night fell, without tenderness. The sky, once washed in lavender and breathless blues, now wore its stars like scars, sharp and cold, reminders of things long vanished but not forgotten. Clara moved through the dark, with steps that belonged to no one but herself now. Her dress was torn, her hair wild, her hand steady as stone. She had not asked permission. She had not waited for rescue. She followed the tracks Naiche left behind like threads sewn into the earth, invisible to others, but screaming in her blood. He had gone east, toward the ravine where deer gathered in spring and elders said spirits whispered through the trees. She knew that place. He had once shown her where the moss grew soft enough to sleep on, how the water there ran colder than anywhere else. If he had to disappear, he would disappear there. She found him by scent before sight, smoke and cedar, and something fainter, the copper tang of blood. He was seated by a low fire, one arm wrapped in cloth darkened by his own wound. A gash across his ribs leaked slowly. He did not rise when he heard her approach, only turned, his face unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," he said, "or meant to." She knelt before him anyway. "You shouldn't have left," she answered, and meant it more. For a long moment they said nothing. The fire popped softly between them, its glow turning their shadows into strangers dancing behind the trees. Then Clara reached into the satchel she carried, unwrapped the salve and the clean linen she had stolen from the camp, and wordlessly began to clean the wound. Naiche did not flinch. He only watched her the way he always had, with stillness that looked like silence but was something deeper. Reverence. Trust. He told her what she already knew, that Mocha DeVito had threatened her, that the elders had voted for trade, that he had left to protect her from the cage they would build and call mercy. And she told him what he did not know, that leaving her behind had hurt more than ropes, that freedom without him had no shape, no meaning, that if he was exile, then so was she. Naiche looked at her then with an expression she could not name. Not joy, not sadness, something wider, something sacred. They rested only a few hours before dawn began bleeding into the hills. They did not run. They moved deliberate and low, toward the river that curved like a snake's spine below the cliffs. They would follow its bend into the lowlands, where no name held power, and no tribe or town could claim them. But the world was not done with them yet. The trap came sudden. Mocha DeVito rode out from the tree-line with two others, one older, one young and hungry for violence. They blocked the path, horses snorting, bows raised but not yet drawn. Clara stepped forward before Naiche could stop her, placing herself in their view. Her fingers clenched around the small blade she kept hidden against her thigh, the one Naiche had once sharpened for her in silence. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Her stance was enough. Mocha DeVito smiled without warmth, said something cruel in his tongue, laughed, then spurred his horse forward. Naiche moved like a storm breaking. No words, no sound, just the strike of muscle and intent. The horses reared, arrows loosed into air. Clara ducked, felt one fly past her cheek like a whisper. Naiche met Mocha DeVito in the clearing center. They crashed not like warriors, but like old truths colliding. Fists, blade, blood. No art, no ceremony, just fire let loose in flesh. Clara could do nothing but watch until one of the others raised a knife and charged. She turned, instincts burning hotter than fear, and met him with the blade in her hand. It was not grace. It was not skill, but it was enough. He fell, and did not rise. She turned back just as Mocha DeVito slipped on the stones slick with rain, stumbled, and Naiche drove him back with one last heave. He lost his footing. The edge was too close. His scream was short. Then the silence swallowed him whole. Naiche stood, bloodied and breathless, staring down into the ravine. Clara walked to him, touched his shoulder. "It is over," she said. "No," he answered, "not quite." They left the bodies behind, not from disrespect, but because they could not carry the weight of death when they had barely saved life. They walked for days, through forest and stream, under sun and bruised sky, sometimes speaking, often not. And it was in that silence, in those stolen, aching hours, that something began to settle between them, not passion like fire, but warmth like ember. A steady, stubborn thing. A love that did not ask to be named, because it had already shaped them both. They found a patch of land on the edge of nowhere, a rise above a meadow where birds nested low and deer walked without fear. They built slowly, first shelter, then fence, then garden. She planted corn and beans. He built a smokehouse. Neither asked for more than the other could give. They did not need to. Years passed in quiet rhythm. The world moved on, forgetting them, and they let it. Sometimes travelers passed through. They never asked questions, only accepted water and warmth and the brief comfort of people who knew how to survive in silence. Clara grew older. Her hair grayed like frost at the edges. Naiche's hand stiffened, but his eyes never dimmed. He still watched the world like it might change again, and she still carried her story like a secret pressed against her ribs. One spring morning, she stood on the porch of the small home they had built, watching a pair of finches argue in the branches of a cottonwood tree. Behind her, Naiche carved small toys for the village children who sometimes visited. His knife whispered softly against the wood. She turned, looked at him, and smiled. "You remember that bird?" she said. "The one you let go in the river?" He looked up, nodded once. "I think we were both that bird," she said. "We just didn't know how strong our wings were." He placed the carving beside the others, stood, walked to her, and together they watched the sky. Some stories end in fire, others in blood, but a few, just a precious few, end like this, in silence, beside someone who sees you not as what you were taken from, but as what you chose to become. To those listening tonight, to those watching from distant places with tired hearts, remember this. There is a kind of love that does not rescue. It endures. If this story lit a quiet spark inside you, let it grow. Like, comment, and tell us, where are you watching from, partner? The fire's still warm here. Come sit a while.